How do you get rid of the? How do you burn up the self completely?
You practice. That's how you get rid of the self, by practicing recognizing what the self is and then what it isn't. It's a very simple process. What it isn't. So you need to know as much of what it is about what it isn't as you need to know what it is. And we're not talking about just a masking. The self as mask is not the problem. Self as limitation is a problem. When you identify with forms of self that are very binding and limiting, see, and inhibiting, see. So that level of self is the question.
Yeah, but don't you have to not be able to? Don't you have to like eliminate thinking to get rid of the self?
Well,
if you're thinking, aren't you in your self mind every time you're thinking?
Thought is different. There's a self, of course, but then there's thinking that is like beyond thinking. See. But the idea, if you have a self, you have to be beyond self. See. But there's the mind is very profound. See. So there are all different kinds of levels of thought. You're talking about self-thought. When it comes to self-thought, yeah, you have to trim that. Because then that has to do with then self-building, thinking. But then there's free thinking, right? The scholars and the masters had thought processes, but they weren't limited to self-limitation or self-limiting thought as such. They had more, something we would dare to say is more like heart thought, right? Not just self-thought. In terms of school that you and I both were aware of, then there's soul thought, capital S. Soul thought. Clear, selfless, happy thought. See? Happy thought. Now thought. See? No ego involved in that. See? Direct perception of what it is. So self, you have to define what that is and then determine whether or not that's what stands in your way. See? Like your fears, right? Your desires. Those are things that the self generates and manifests that stand in your way. Because they don't liberate you, they keep you bound to what you desire, what you look at, what you fantasize about, right? And what you hope to have for yourself. Anything that's going to build the selfishness is what needs to be trimmed back. See? So you're clear. You're not full of a desire for peeps and women, right? The whole woman thing. See? So desire is a trap. See? It really limits you from the spiritual. Have no doubt about that. It's all about emotional desire. That's the barrier.
Well, any attachment is a trap, isn't it? Any attachment to like the world.
Well, you could be attached to the guru, but that's a pretty open trap. A lot of people are attached to the highest wisdom, right? They're attached to it, and they should be. But of course, at some point, you want to go beyond that. You need to go beyond everything. See, so attachment then is a device you use to bring you closer to something. See, and that could be like proximity, physical proximity. See? And seeing, it could be something, a visual thing as well. So all of the senses can entrap you and they can liberate you, see? Because it's all part of the enlightenment process. See? Enlightenment is part of this. See? Enlightened eyes, enlightened seeing, enlightened smelling, right? Enlightened thinking and tasting and touching is all, the gurus, enlightened people do use their senses. So. Because they use their senses doesn't mean they're unenlightened. See? So you have to bring light or bring the quality of emptiness to all of your senses. You need to purify yourself. Then we're talking about purifying yourself. So that what comes through you, even though it appears to be itself, is not selfish, maybe selfless. Maybe you can put your pants on selflessly. I'm not sure you can take them off selflessly, but that's something you have to determine for yourself. You can do selflessly, or with preoccupation in your mind. And the idea is to live your life from a more selfless viewpoint. It doesn't mean being absolutely without self, whatever that is. But we're talking about being without limitation and suffering. Not just identity. Identity has to go. See? No doubt about it.
Well, I mean, that's what you say in all your books. You got to get rid of self.
You have to get beyond the self of suffering. Clarity. Right. And any form of self that is an obstruction to the light is worth trimming back. But that has to do with self-image. If you think you're merely a jazz musician or a piano teacher, that's a problem. There's no such thing. See? Yeah, occupationally it's true, but there's no such thing. You think you're a man? Right? You're not a man, you're called a man. But that's a conventional description of a bag of garbage. See? Human garbage. Yeah. We're none of that. If we are that, what does the word spirit really mean? See? It means you're not your body. There's no body. Right? You heard out of the body? I say, nobody. Right? It's code. There's no body. There's no body in your way. What does that mean? You're pure soul? Right? You're Buddha nature then? Pure body? Yeah. You can have a body that's no body. Like you have a mind that's not really mind either. See? So when we're talking about the spiritual, there's a much deeper dynamic and level of understanding than typical intellectual, conventional self-understanding. It's beyond that.
You're going to be just totally dissolved?
Who cares? I'm already dissolved. I'm already not existing. See? That's already happening. See? You may be too much in the body and its mind, and therefore you ask from there. You're not coming from an intuition of what spirit is.
So you have no desire to come back?
No desire even to be here, in a manner of speaking. Or come back or move forward. Neither of those are valid. So maybe it's incomprehensible, but no, it's called abiding in the moment. Abiding in your emptiness. It's a concept, but for practitioners it's serious. It's like real. It's not just a concept. Abiding in the light. After a certain amount of exposure to the spiritual works and the use of the term light, you start to resonate with it. You say, oh, I know, that's light. Oh, this is heavy, this is light. That's darkness, this is light. And as we purify ourselves, you're enlightening yourself, so to speak, relatively so. And so you welcome the light, and even more light. It's all about the light. So that everything you say is relative to the light, and from this light, with all due respect to the light, and then it's not just a word, it's like a reality. It's a reality. So we use the word in the beginning, but you have to make it reality. Like use the word music in the beginning, but then you have to make it a reality for yourself. You need to be able to play it, feel it, know it, enjoy it, right? Preferably enjoy it rather than be intimidated by it. And so we need to talk. We need to get the concept happening in order, ordinarily, to move into the reality of it. Now, we have to conceive of heaven to some degree, and maybe open to it. So you have to conceive of enlightenment, and then you need to maybe open to it, because we're talking about it not so much as a thing outside of you, but it as a process that you are already a part of. We're talking about the livingness of what it is. Yeah, but the issue is spiritual practice is lifelong. It's deep involvement. It's not just for a few moments. It's not just on some days when I'm dressed a certain way, masking around, masquerading around.
Well, I remember when I went out and saw you one night. I forgot where it was. I don't know. I think it wasn't downtown. You were staying in somebody else's apartment, and you were talking to me, and all of a sudden I saw all these flames jumping around. All this light and flame energy jumping around. This goes back a long time, the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I said, my God.
Yeah. So you saw some light around me, or
I saw light and flames.
I heard that. People would tell me that at that time. People would say that, right?
Sat down and talked to you, and you were against the wall, and everything started
interesting.
bursting.
Look at that. See, we come here for anecdotes of the early days, right? The yogi.
Well, but you know, I mean, that, you know, that was like,
But you were ready for that, weren't you?
yeah, well, I
You,
mean,
you needed that. At that point, you needed that. There was some kind of assurance or something that you needed to see to have a better understanding of at least some of where I was coming from. I don't say I manifested that. I'm saying, you know, the light is present, you know. And so you got to see it. You got to see it with your physical body. You saw a vivid version of it. But other people during that same time told me about that. See? And so I can't be responsible for it. It's just phenomena that was being manifested spontaneously due to my practice at that time. I had nothing to do with it, but it's possible.
well, you were talking, I mean, you were,
I was
Channeling.
channeling, yes. So
Channeling.
channeling these things, this kind of phenomena can come up. But that's also true in the music when I'm playing. Things can manifest, as we know. So, yes, I don't say I control it, but what's going on with me can go on with anybody. It depends on what your relationship is to the subtle bodies that you are. See?
And I've experienced also sitting here during video recordings these visuals, strong impressions of fire and light and intensity, different qualities of heat, and you know it's
Some might call that Shakti, or a manifestation of Shakti or Siddhi, like certain kind of inner power that comes out. And it occurs by itself. Maybe when the circumstances are right, then it shows up. But that's like a spiritual manifestation for you to see. So you know, it just distinguishes this from other things that you may be a part of. And this comes with practice. I don't say I practice to do that. Never have, never will. But I practice to be a channel of the light. But I don't mean that in a certain, supernatural manifestational sense. That has to come out of itself. So can we each go deep enough to create resonance with that level of purification? Yes. Can.
in your case, what does it mean to be enlightened or to speak from that perspective?
What does it mean?
Um,
I mean, that's the natural state, so it's not a special state. So it really means that you're in your zone, right? Your flow. You're coming from the heart. See, the heart mind. See, this circuitry. You're coming from there, and it's selfless, spontaneous, see, and happy, and gracious, see, and good. See, that's everybody's potential. So I'm not saying we should expect that, but that can happen. It depends on how intimately you are related to your heart and mind. See, not as a thing that's separate, but as a thing that's being used by the Spirit. So you need to be open to that potential that we have. See.
you have to teach again, or you have to be some kind of,
Then it happens, but that's something that is given. See, that is something that is given. It's not something that's self-created. If the order comes down in that way, then of course I would respond. I can only give what I'm given. See, I can only share what I'm given in spirit. So if it's given to me to do something else, and I feel that that is a genuine real, then I will be happy to oblige it.
well, I mean, you know, like these other masters on the other planes, for example, you know, when you encounter somebody on another plane,
Yeah.
they're given that task to do, or that
I can't speak for anyone. I don't speak for anyone. I speak for what I understand the process is. If it's given to you, you have to deal with it. You have to determine whether it's true for you or your being. See? Remember, we are potentially spiritual beings, all of us, every single one of us, demonic or angelic. See? We show up because of the light. We don't show up because of the darkness. How you behave might be due to your relationship to darkness and self, but we show up because we are fundamentally light, right? We're spirits. See? I'm not saying we are enlightened spirits, but we are light spirits. See? We are ghosts. See? We have astral bodies, see? And they're visible sometimes. So the manifestation potential for every individual is unknown, but can be profound. And we are profoundly gifted with the idea of the spirit, and the idea of its love, and the idea of its beauty and its grace. We have that built into us. See? And so as we get closer to the spiritual, we respond more to it. See? We open to it, because we know it's benign, it's beautiful. See? It's luminous. See? It's illuminating and enlightening. It's also sweet. See? And full of grace. All the things that make the spirit want to open, expand, see? Into givingness, see? Generosity and grace.
I'm just going to leave it running. Seems like it'll work better that way. Is a certain sensitivity to and awareness of and function on the different planes something that all beings go through on a progression towards enlightenment?
Can't say that. We can say we are in the service of all beings as servants, but we can't say what all beings go through necessarily. All beings go through the gamut of living and suffering, and then maybe rising, purification, sorrow, and happiness. All beings have to experience that relative to their karma. So some beings live for a few days, and there's just so much they can experience. And then what happens to them becomes not so much a payment for them, because they're not even aware of what the payment is, right? They're just babies. The payment goes to the parents. So the parents have to suffer what happens to a baby, not the baby necessarily. Others have to suffer for that child. They suffer the loss of the child. And so the universe of living is full of payments, debits and merits, and gifts and blessings.
But the idea is to get beyond all that, isn't it?
Well, at some point you want to have some grace in your face, right? So you want to open to grace before you get beyond it. You want to have some. It's like money. You want to know what money is before you go beyond it. Many people feel that. So you need to know what it is before you can give it up. And that's true of your body. You want to know what your body is before you give it up, right? You want to know what food is before you give it up. You want to know what it is. See? And then you can go into fasting as a way of life as much as you can tolerate, as needed. See?
Is there the immediate realization and then the sort of slow boat where you kind of go through your karmic expressions?
If you're talking about manifestation of grace and spiritual energy or experiences, they can come anyway, anytime. See? Because we're in that universe. See? Just because you're separated by perception and incarnated into the flesh, and thus limited to how much light you can handle or want. Because the typical ordinary human's appetite for sensuality, that's low light. That's not high light, but that's low light. Thrills, low light. Sensation, pleasure, it's low light. It's not spiritual in a sense. It's uplifting perhaps, but it's not high light. See?
Oh, but it always leads to conflict. Doesn't sensation always lead to conflict? I mean, that's part of your teachings. Like
Not-
sex
not-
always
not-
leads to conflict.
Well, that's not. No, what leads to conflict then is attachment to what it is, and the emotion that comes up. If you are suffering what it is, then there's where your conflict is, due to your attachment. See, and that's where the conflict comes from. No.
But I mean, if you're going to be absorbed in sensuality, you're going to be attached to it.
You're
right?
going to be occupied by it.
It's attached to it. That's the same as
Attached, yeah. But what is your question?
It's
yeah.
not a question. It's just that
Sensuality is not sensuality. Okay, it's another one of those things that we have to see it for what it is. See? It's a distraction. Sensuality. See, if we're talking about sexual sensuality, that's one thing. Then you have people who are into all kinds of other levels of sensuality. Right? Like driving a car is sensual, right? Flying an airplane, jumping out of airplanes. See, they're so sensual. Everything you do is sensual. So we're not saying that that's the problem. No, that's the field of experience. And you can suffer it or you can be beyond it. See? But the thing itself is not the problem. It's the who. Your body's not the problem. Your penis is not the problem. Your sexuality is not the problem. It's you that are the problem. It's the one who's in command of the functions, so to speak, that is the problem or the solution, right? In terms of this. So the body's not the sin. The mind is the sin. Sensuality and pleasure are not the sin itself. They're aspects of our experience. But they in themselves don't create the lust. We generate that because we are undisciplined, unconscious, unenlightened, so we don't know what it is. We're into thrill seeking, and we become attached to it, and that becomes a focus, and that's the trap, and then that's the hell of one's own doing. So be clear about that. Yeah. So when you become more enlightened, let's say, whatever that is, you're more at peace. You're okay. You're not being driven crazy by these emotions and desires which are allowed to run amok, and of course you go amok because of your desires, because of your lack of discipline, your lack of restraint, lack of comprehension of how important it is to balance yourself. So you go that way. In practice you stop and you engage in and try to abide in the stillness of being. It doesn't mean you have to be in a cave for 50 years like some yogis are supposedly needing to do, see, to get to that point where they can come back to society and be productive and happy beings. See. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So cultivating emptiness, right? That is the radiance of nothingness, to use a certain kind of wording for it, right? Emptiness, openness, see, compassion, emptiness, being free of darkness, emptiness, see, empty of confusion, emptiness, see, meaning radiance, allowing the light to come through. See, it's good practice. See.
Does that emptiness coexist with sensation?
Coexist with everything. Everything then has to be found as empty of itself. Mm-hmm. Comment? Everything is already empty. Right? Depends on your value of what it is. Yeah? The self-value. Mm-hmm. So there are many different levels to get to. And when you're talking spiritual, you're talking about really, I think, a form of formlessness. Real spirituality is not your carcass per se. It's not a physical thing to be literal about it. It means non-material, spiritual. So subtle as to not even be perceivable, see, by ordinary means. It's gone. See, it's like space. Subtle, super subtle space, which is what we are made of, etheric, cosmic etheric energy. See? We are made of that. See? And from there we have a light body, which is that energy. It's light. See? The soul body is that energy. It's light. See? Spirit body, see? Not physical as such, but it's related. It's relevant. It's a component of this, like a harmonic level of your nature. Yeah, we are the spiritual side of life. See? By knowing. And then so well that we can be the spiritual side of life. See? The non-self, thought, and mind and world side of life. All of that was concepts relating to functions and activities that are specific to maybe human being. Right? That's not who we are, but we adapt to the situation we're in with humans, and we share common reality with human beings as part of the convention of relating to one another, right? But we are not that, see? But we are capable of showing up as that and this and whatever, see, appears in the mind. Any image, any form, any body. We have all of that in us. The whole universe is in your consciousness. Buried, stuck away in your consciousness. And then you have your unconsciousness, which has more of the universe that's even more frightening and not worth looking into for most people. Too scary because it would appear to be more chaotic and mysterious and frightening. Because there everything is mixed. There's maybe no fear, and so death is not death, life is not life. It seems to be a little bit mad, but that's the unconscious. You have the superconscious, and everything is great and beautiful, right? Like perfect, like enlightened superconsciousness. Enlightened being like maybe boring for some people. It's like serene, clear. It's not everybody's experience. See? Blissful, it's not everybody's experience. Happy, it's not everybody's experience. See? So people have to train themselves to get beyond their neuroses, to get into that level where they are that themselves, the serene blissfulness of, say, spirit. That's at the source of everyone. We go deeper. See? And so all the darkness that we're so familiar with, and the pain and suffering, and the chaos and craziness, uncertainty and unpredictability, we used to see just human garbage. It's human garbage. But that's an effect of culturing. That's not the truth of our being. See? It is a result of what you attach to and what you image and imagine and what you think about and what you fantasize over, and it's all mixed into this hodgepodge of psychic and psychologic impressions that are like, the world and such. And not the spiritual world, but it's your self world, your personal world, your egoic world, right? The limited world. As we go deeper, we might start to feel we need more than our world, as it was, in terms of all the things we fear and desire and are crazy about, see, and suffer. See. We go deeper, we start to understand the nature of creation, see, and how things are made and how things are put into action, and how karma is formed. As you go deeper, you start to see this for oneself. You see it, you start to understand it. Say, well, this is creation. I am creation. I can create heaven, just as I've done well to create my hell. I can transform that. Recreate the world.
So in a world of swirling karma, other beings have their karma. We interact with other beings. We interact with their karma. We have our own karma. There's a lot of sharing and blending and mixing of different intensities.
And confusion as a result.
Yeah. So where does the responsibility ultimately lie with the practitioner?
With the individual to transcend all of that if they can perceive it as such, and then be a more enlightened representative of being human, see, which then would be considerably neurosis-free. Neurosis is the obstruction to the spiritual. See, it's food, yes, it's fuel for the fire of practice, but we need to not be neurotic beings, unhappy beings. See?
And so is it...
And so we are mechanically that, but not truly that. Therefore, there's a possibility of entering stages of enlightenment, because we are truly that, and not really mechanically that. That's the fact of it. So we are naturally enlightened potential, naturally. So as a person moves from their karmic world, the machine world, the time world, into the monastic, they start to feel lightness already. So, wow, this is easy, because you're becoming more naturally open to the real. See, beyond your neuroses, your suffering yourself, and all your sort of confusion, it disappears. Mm-hmm. So practice is easier in a monastic situation, not for everybody, 'cause not everybody shares the same mind. But you notice, the less stress you have, the less stuff you have, the more you're able to abide as a peaceful being. Yeah? Going deeper, see that that's your true nature. Yeah.
Is it also not our true nature to be neurotic?
Oh, that's your false nature. We can't say it's true. It's true that you're a neurotic, but that's not your true nature. That's your true. That's your true neurotic nature.
What does true mean?
True means real, real and only true. It's only. See.
So in other words, if you identify with the state of grace, the more you identify with the state of grace, the more you be in grace.
You can become that. Yeah, that's what practice is about. That's why they have gurus, representing a state of grace, or images representing a state of grace, so that you become more what that is. See, which is you. So you're using something as a device or a matrix to come to terms with what your truth is, as master of your life. See, the whole thing is really about mastering your life. It's not about just indulging your life. It is to move and progress, go through experiences, so that at some point you come out like beyond, you climb levels of reality, where you become more naturally peaceful because you let go what you don't need. You let go of what you've taken on that other people don't need. You don't need. Nobody needs it. See? We don't need the stress. So you need to make a choice in your own life to be or not to be stressful for the sake of your son and other peeps. Yeah. And it's a discipline, so it's not easy to be stressless when you're used to being a stressed out wacko.